Once she turns 18, move everything immediately. I froze halfway down the staircase when I heard my mother whisper those words into her phone at 11:47 p.m. The grandfather clock in our foyer ticked so loudly that night it sounded like a warning. I remember gripping the cold wooden railing while my heart pounded against my ribs hard enough to make me feel dizzy. My 18th birthday was only a few hours away, and suddenly the woman who had spent my entire life telling me she was protecting my future sounded terrified of midnight. My name is Chloe Whitmore, and until that night, I believed my mother controlled every part of my life because she loved me. We lived in a 6-bedroom colonial house outside Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind with white pillars, trimmed hedges, and polished black shutters that looked perfect in Christmas movies. Everything in our home was spotless. Every blanket folded. Every dish returned to the exact shelf it belonged on. My mother liked control. She liked silence even more. "She can't know before the transfer clears," she whispered again. I crouched lower on the staircase, careful not to let the old wood creak beneath my feet. Her office door was cracked slightly open, warm yellow light spilling into the dark hallway. "No mistakes this time," she said sharply. Then silence. Then softer. "After tomorrow, it'll finally belong to me." A strange chill moved through my body. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Confusion mixed with instinct. My mother, Vanessa Whitmore, had always spoken about my trust fund like it was some distant technical matter handled by lawyers and accountants. My grandfather Leonard Hayes created it before he died when I was 7. According to my mother, the money was protected until I turned 18 because wealthy families had complicated rules. That was the explanation she used anytime I asked questions. And eventually, I stopped asking. I stood there for another minute listening to the muffled sound of her voice before I quietly returned upstairs to my bedroom. My hands trembled as I shut the door behind me. Outside my window, rain tapped softly against the glass. The digital clock beside my bed glowed. 11:52 p.m. In 8 minutes, it would officially be my birthday. I sat down slowly at my desk and stared at the stack of unopened birthday cards from relatives I barely knew. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just wrong in the quietest possible way. Like noticing a painting hanging slightly crooked after staring at it for years. Suddenly memories began surfacing one after another. Missing bank statements. Locked drawers in my mother's office. The way she always intercepted mail addressed to me. The way she insisted I never needed to meet the family attorney myself. Last month, I'd casually asked how much was in the trust fund, and she'd smiled too quickly before changing the subject to college applications. At the time, I ignored it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I opened my laptop and typed one sentence into the search bar with shaking fingers. Can a parent control a trust fund after a child turns 18? The answer appeared instantly. Usually not. Unless legal control had been extended beforehand. My stomach tightened. Downstairs, I heard my mother's heels cross the marble floor. Then the click of a lock. I looked toward my bedroom door, suddenly aware that my entire life had been carefully managed by someone who didn't want me asking questions. And for the first time in my life, I realized my mother was afraid of me becoming an adult. I did not sleep that night. I stayed in bed staring at the ceiling while the rain continued tapping against my windows in soft, uneven rhythms. Every sound inside the house suddenly felt deliberate. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The distant ticking of the grandfather clock. The quiet footsteps of my mother moving somewhere in the hallway long after midnight. At 2:13 a.m., I heard her bedroom door close. At 2:17, I heard the deadbolt lock downstairs. My mother always locked the doors twice before bed, but that night the sound felt less like routine and more like preparation. By morning, the house looked exactly the same as it always did. Sunlight spilled across the marble kitchen counters. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase beside the espresso machine. My mother stood near the stove wearing cream-colored slacks and a cashmere sweater, as polished and controlled as ever. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said with a smile that almost looked real. She kissed my cheek lightly before placing a plate of blueberry pancakes in front of me. I sat down slowly, studying her face while she poured coffee into her white porcelain mug. Nothing about her expression suggested panic. Nothing suggested guilt. That frightened me more than if she had screamed. "Big day," she said casually. 18. I nodded and forced myself to smile back. "Yeah, you finally get a taste of adulthood," she said while stirring cream into her coffee. Although honestly, most people your age are not prepared for real responsibility. I looked down at my plate. Maybe some are. Her spoon stopped moving for half a second before continuing again. Small pauses had become important to me overnight. I noticed everything now. The way her office key never left her wrist. The way she angled documents away whenever I entered a room. The way she monitored every conversation I had with adults connected to my grandfather's estate. I scheduled lunch at the club this afternoon, she said. A few family friends want to celebrate you. Family friends. That usually meant older wealthy people who complimented my posture and asked where I planned to attend college while my mother answered for me before I could speak. Sounds good, I replied quietly. She smiled again, satisfied by my calmness. That was the role she preferred for me. Quiet daughter. Grateful daughter. Easy daughter. After breakfast, she left briefly for a Pilates class downtown. The second I heard the garage door close, I walked directly into her office for the first time in years. The room smelled faintly like leather and lavender candles. Everything was perfectly arranged. Darkwood shelves, silver picture frames, neatly stacked folders aligned with impossible precision. It looked less like an office and more like a museum exhibit about control. I opened the top drawer of her desk carefully. Bills, invitations, charity paperwork. Nothing unusual. The second drawer was locked. So was the cabinet beside the window. My pulse quickened. Then I noticed a thin envelope partially hidden beneath a legal pad near her computer. My name was typed across the front in black ink. Chloe Whitmore. Confidential beneficiary review. I stared at the envelope for several seconds before sliding the papers out slowly. The first page contained financial summaries I had never seen before. Investment accounts, property holdings, trust distributions. Numbers so large they barely felt real. My grandfather had left me more money than I could comprehend. Millions. But that was not what made my stomach drop. Halfway down the second page was a line that read, Proposed conservatorship extension request pending psychological evaluation. I stopped breathing for a moment. Conservatorship. Psychological evaluation. Beneath those words sat my mother's signature dated 3 weeks earlier. I looked toward the office door, suddenly aware of how quiet the house had become. Then I heard the distant sound of the garage door beginning to open. I barely had enough time to slide the papers back into the envelope before the front door opened downstairs. My heartbeat slammed against my chest as I shoved the folder beneath the legal pad exactly where I had found it. The sound of my mother's heels echoed across the marble floor below. Calm, precise, controlled. I stepped away from the desk and forced myself to breathe normally while sunlight poured through the office windows like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had changed. I understood that now. I slipped out of the office just as my mother's footsteps reached the staircase. Chloe, she called. Are you upstairs? In my room. I answered immediately, trying to keep my voice steady. I closed my bedroom door softly and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. Conservatorship. Psychological evaluation. Pending request. The words repeated in my mind over and over. My mother was trying to convince someone that I was incapable of managing my own life. Not because I was unstable. Not because I needed help. Because she wanted control of the money. Around noon, she drove us to the Greenwich Country Club for lunch. The entire drive smelled faintly of her expensive perfume and leather upholstery. Classical music played softly through the speakers while she talked about college housing and internship opportunities as if the morning had never happened. I watched her hands resting calmly on the steering wheel and wondered how many lies those hands had signed over the years. You have been quiet today, she said as we stopped at a red light. Just tired, I replied. Birthdays lose their excitement eventually. She smiled slightly. Trust me, adulthood is not nearly as glamorous as teenagers imagine. The country club looked exactly the way wealthy places always do. White stone walls, fresh hydrangeas, men in golf shirts discussing investment portfolios over lunch, women with diamond bracelets laughing softly beside oversized windows overlooking the golf course. Everything polished, everything expensive. My mother belonged perfectly in rooms like that. She introduced me to people I barely remembered while waiters carried plates of salmon and sparkling water around us. Chloe is considering Yale, she told one couple proudly. Her grandfather always wanted her surrounded by serious people. I nearly laughed at the irony. Serious people. Meanwhile, she had spent weeks trying to legally prevent me from controlling my own inheritance. Halfway through lunch, My phone buzzed beneath the table. Ethan Cole. I glanced at my mother before opening the message discreetly. Happy birthday. You alive over there? I stared at the screen for a second before typing back under the tablecloth. Barely. Can we talk later? 3 dots appeared immediately. Sure. Everything okay? I looked up and saw my mother watching me carefully from across the table. Her smile remained pleasant, but her eyes sharpened slightly. Who is texting you? She asked casually. Ethan, I answered. He just wished me happy birthday. She took a slow sip of water. You spend a lot of time with him lately. He is my friend. Of course, she said lightly. I just hope you remember that some people become interested when money enters the picture. The sentence landed heavily between us. She said it while smiling. That was her talent. My mother never raised her voice. She planted ideas. Softly, like placing tiny weights into someone's pockets until they drowned slowly without noticing. When lunch finally ended, she stopped near the valet stand and adjusted the sleeve of my coat gently. Tonight is important, she said. A lot of people care about this family's reputation. Reputation. Not happiness. Not trust. Reputation. I nodded quietly and followed her toward the car, but as we walked across the parking lot, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. My mother checked her watch constantly. Every few minutes. Like she was counting down to something she could not afford to miss. That afternoon, the house felt different when we returned from the country club. Smaller somehow. Tighter. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My mother disappeared into her office almost immediately after we walked inside, carrying her leather portfolio pressed tightly against her side. I watched her cross the foyer in silence before the office door shut with a soft click. Then the lock turned. I stood alone near the staircase, staring at the closed door while sunlight stretched across the marble floor in long pale strips. For years, I had accepted those locked doors as normal. Wealthy families valued privacy. That was what my mother always said. Privacy, security, protection. Now every locked drawer felt like evidence. Around 4 o'clock, I texted Ethan and asked if he could meet me at Harbor Grounds, the small coffee shop near the marina downtown. I told my mother I needed fresh air before the party tonight. She studied my face carefully when I said it, as if searching for signs of something she could still control. Do not stay out too long, she said. People will begin arriving by 7. I nodded and grabbed my coat. The October air outside smelled like rain and salt from the harbor. Gray clouds hung low over the water, while rows of expensive sailboats rocked gently against their docks. Harbor Grounds was nearly empty except for 2 college students working on laptops near the window. Ethan was already there waiting in a booth with a black hoodie and messy blonde hair that looked permanently windblown no matter the season. He smiled when he saw me, but the smile faded almost immediately. Okay, he said quietly after I sat down. What happened? I wrapped both hands around the paper coffee cup the barista handed me even though I was not cold. I think my mother is trying to keep control of my trust fund after tonight. Ethan blinked once. What? I explained everything in a low voice. The phone call, the papers in her office, the conservatorship request, the psychological evaluation. Ethan listened without interrupting, but I noticed his jaw tighten more with every sentence. That is insane, he finally said. Can she even do that? I do not know. Have you talked to the family attorney? I laughed softly without humor. I have barely even met him. Ethan leaned back against the booth, staring out the rain-covered window for a second before looking at me again. Chloe, this is not normal. I looked down at my coffee. I think part of me always knew something was off. Saying it out loud made something settle painfully inside my chest. Memories kept surfacing now that I had stopped defending her in my mind. Every time I asked about college finances, she became irritated. Every piece of mail connected to the trust disappeared before I could open it. Last year, I tried scheduling a meeting with an academic advisor in Boston without telling her first. She canceled it behind my back because she said I was too overwhelmed to make decisions alone. At the time, I thought she was overprotective. Now I wondered if she had been building a story about me for years. Ethan reached into his backpack suddenly and pulled out a folded business card. My uncle works in estate law, he said. He knows a guy named Harrison Reed. I think he handles your grandfather's old accounts. I stared at the card. Harrison Reed. The same name printed across several documents in my mother's office. Call him, Ethan said firmly. Today, outside the coffee shop, thunder rumbled faintly over the harbor. I looked down at the business card resting in my hand while my pulse began to quicken again. Then my phone lit up on the table. One new message from my mother. Where are you? The guests will be arriving soon. Beneath the text, another message appeared seconds later. Do not embarrass me tonight. I returned home just after 6:30. The driveway was already lined with expensive cars glistening beneath the wet evening lights. Through the tall front windows, I could see caterers moving through the dining room, carrying trays of champagne, while soft jazz floated through the house. Everything looked elegant, controlled, perfect. My mother stood near the foyer greeting guests in a dark emerald dress with diamond earrings my grandfather once gave her for an anniversary. She smiled warmly the second she saw me walk in, but I noticed the tension in her shoulders immediately. There you are, she said softly as she kissed my cheek. People were beginning to ask questions. Traffic near the marina was bad, I replied. Her eyes lingered on my face for half a second longer than necessary. Well, she said lightly, try to look happier. Tonight is important for our family. Family. The word sounded strange now. I walked upstairs to my bedroom while guests filled the house below. Laughter drifted upward through the hallways along with the faint clinking of glasses. I closed my door quietly and pulled the business card Ethan gave me from my coat pocket. Harrison Reed, estate attorney. My thumb hovered over the phone screen for several seconds before I finally dialed the number. The line rang twice. Harrison Reed speaking. His voice sounded older than I expected. Calm. Careful. My name is Chloe Whitmore, I said quietly. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. Chloe. Yes. Another pause followed, heavier this time. I have been trying to reach you for nearly 6 months. My stomach tightened instantly. I sat down slowly at the edge of my bed. What do you mean? Your mother informed me repeatedly that direct contact would be emotionally overwhelming for you, he said carefully. She claimed your anxiety issues made financial discussions dangerous at this stage. I stared at the rain sliding slowly down my bedroom windows. Anxiety issues. Dangerous. The words sounded rehearsed. Prepared. I do not have anxiety issues, I said quietly. I assumed as much, Mr. Reed replied. Your grandfather specifically requested that you gain complete control of the trust at midnight on your 18th birthday, unless 2 independent medical evaluations proved permanent incapacity. Coldness spread through my chest. Medical evaluations? Yes. Papers shifted faintly on his end of the line. Your mother recently submitted documentation attempting to delay the transfer. I closed my eyes for a second. What kind of documentation? His hesitation told me everything before he answered. Claims regarding emotional instability, impulsive behavior, difficulty functioning independently. I laughed once under my breath. Not because anything was funny, because suddenly every strange moment over the last few years rearranged itself perfectly inside my head. Every canceled appointment. Every time my mother insisted I was overwhelmed. Every subtle correction in front of other adults. She had been creating a version of me that only existed on paper. Listen carefully, Chloe, Mr. Reed said quietly. Did you personally authorize any conservatorship extension? No. Did you sign any amended trust documents? No. Good. His voice lowered further. Then your mother may have a serious problem. Downstairs, applause suddenly erupted from the dining room. I could hear my mother laughing brightly among the guests. I imagined her downstairs raising champagne glasses while discussing charity events and investment portfolios with people who believe she was a devoted mother protecting her vulnerable daughter. What happens at midnight? I asked. Unless legally stopped beforehand, Mr. Reed replied. Every account, property holding, and investment connected to the Hayes Trust transfers directly to you. I looked toward my bedroom door as footsteps passed in the hallway outside. Can she stop it? Silence again. Then finally, only if she convinces the court you cannot manage your own affairs. My grip tightened around the phone. And if I prove I can, then everything changes tonight. I ended the call with Mr. Reed and sat motionless on the edge of my bed while the sounds of the party drifted through the house below me. Glasses clinked softly. Someone laughed too loudly near the staircase. A jazz pianist played near the dining room windows while servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays under warm golden lights. The entire house felt staged. Like a performance everyone had rehearsed except me. I looked down at my phone again. 8:14 p.m., less than 4 hours until midnight. Less than 4 hours until my mother either lost control of my life or kept it forever. A soft knock sounded at my bedroom door before it opened slightly. "Sweetheart," my mother asked gently. "Everyone wants to see the birthday girl." I looked up at her standing there in the hallway light, elegant and composed as always. Not a strand of blonde hair out of place. Not a trace of panic visible in her expression. If I had not overheard her phone call the night before, I might still believe she was simply overprotective. Loving even. "I will be down in a minute," I said calmly. She studied me carefully again. "Are you feeling all right?" "Fine. You seem emotional today." There it was again. Another small sentence placed carefully into the world like evidence waiting to be collected later. Emotional. Overwhelmed. Unstable. I smiled faintly. It is my birthday. I think I am allowed to feel emotional. For the first time all evening, something uncertain flickered behind her eyes. Then it disappeared. "Of course," she said softly before closing the door. The second she left, I grabbed my phone and texted Mr. Reed. "What do I need to do tonight?" His response arrived less than a minute later. "Meet me privately before 11. Do not sign anything your mother gives you." My pulse quickened again. I typed back immediately. "She is planning something at midnight." Another pause. Then I know. 10 minutes later, I finally walked downstairs into the party. More than 40 guests filled the house now. Business associates, charity board members, neighbors from gated estates along the shoreline, women in silk dresses, men discussing market trends beside the fireplace with glasses of bourbon in their hands. Everyone smiled when they saw me. "Happy birthday, Chloe. You look beautiful. Your grandfather would be so proud tonight." Proud. The words settled strangely inside me. Across the room, my mother watched every interaction carefully while pretending not to. She moved gracefully through conversations, touching elbows lightly, laughing softly, controlling the atmosphere the same way conductors control orchestras. Then I noticed something else. Near the far side of the dining room stood a man in a gray suit holding a slim leather folder against his chest. He was younger than most of the guests. Clean-cut. Serious. He spoke quietly with my mother near the bar for several seconds before handing her a set of papers. My stomach tightened immediately. She glanced toward me the second the folder touched her hands. Not casually. Directly. Intentionally. I looked away before she realized I noticed. Around 9:30, she finally approached me carrying 2 champagne glasses. "There you are," she said warmly. "People keep asking where you disappear to." I accepted the glass without drinking. "Just needed air." "Well," she said lightly, "there is one small matter we should discuss later tonight. Nothing stressful. Just routine family paperwork now that you are technically becoming an adult." My chest went cold. "Routine paperwork." She said it so effortlessly, like she had practiced the sentence repeatedly before tonight. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked quietly. "Oh, nothing complicated," she replied with a soft smile. "Just documents to help protect you while you adjust to responsibility." Protect you. I almost admired how consistent she was. Every lie wrapped carefully inside concern. Every act of control disguised as love. Somewhere behind us, the grandfather clock in the foyer began chiming the half hour. 9:30. My mother glanced toward the sound automatically. Then she checked her watch again. At 10:15, I slipped quietly out the side entrance near the kitchen while guests gathered around the birthday cake in the dining room. Nobody noticed me leave except my mother. I felt her eyes follow me through the crowd, even while she continued smiling at a woman from the yacht club discussing charity auctions. That was the frightening thing about her. She never stopped watching. The rain had finally stopped outside, leaving the driveway slick beneath the glow of the landscape lights. A black sedan waited near the curb across the street with its headlights dimmed. I crossed the wet pavement quickly and opened the back door. Harrison Reed sat inside wearing a charcoal overcoat with several folders stacked neatly beside him. He looked older than I imagined from his voice. Gray hair, tired eyes, the kind of face that had spent decades dealing with wealthy families and all the damage they caused behind closed doors. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly as I climbed inside. "I was not sure you would." "I almost did not," I admitted. The car smelled faintly of leather and coffee. Outside the windows, my house glowed warmly against the dark Connecticut night, like a perfect advertisement for old money and stability. Mr. Reed handed me a thick folder immediately. "You need to see what your mother submitted." My hands felt cold as I opened it. Inside were copies of psychological evaluations, behavior reports, and legal requests stamped with official court headings. My eyes moved across sentences that barely felt connected to me at all. Emotional dependency issues, impaired judgment, difficulty regulating stress responses, recommendation for extended conservatorship oversight. These are lies, I whispered. Mostly exaggerations, Mr. Reed corrected quietly. Which is more dangerous? Complete fabrications are easier to disprove. I turned another page and froze. Attached near the back was a letter from a private therapist I had seen briefly after my father died when I was 12. I remembered crying during 2 sessions because I missed him. That was all. Yet somehow those records had become evidence questioning my ability to manage financial decisions 6 years later. How did she even get this? I asked. Your mother has spent years building a paper trail, he said carefully. Slowly, quietly. That is why I became concerned months ago. I stared down at the pages while nausea twisted inside my stomach. This was not impulsive, not emotional. My mother had planned this carefully over years while smiling at me across dinner tables and helping me shop for prom dresses and reminding me to wear sunscreen during summer vacations. Why did my grandfather leave everything to me instead of her? I asked softly. Mr. Reed was silent for a moment. Your grandfather loved your mother, he said finally. But he did not trust her relationship with money. The sentence landed heavily inside the quiet car. Mr. Reed opened another folder and slid several documents toward me. These are emergency transfer protections, he explained. If you sign before midnight, your mother loses all temporary administrative authority the second the trust transfers. I looked at the papers carefully. The language felt overwhelming, but not impossible. My name appeared again and again beside words like beneficiary, sole authority, and protected assets. Will this stop her? I asked. It will stop immediate control, he replied. But once she realizes what happened, she may attempt emotional pressure or public humiliation to force you into reversing decisions voluntarily. I almost laughed quietly. She has been doing that my whole life. For the first time that evening, Mr. Reed's expression softened slightly. Then perhaps you are more prepared than she realizes. I signed the papers one by one while rainwater dripped softly from the trees outside the car windows. Each signature felt strangely calm. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just final. When I finished, Mr. Reed sealed the documents carefully inside a large envelope and checked his watch. 10:52 p.m. It is done, he said quietly. I looked back toward the brightly lit house across the street where guests still moved behind the tall windows holding champagne glasses while my mother continued hosting a celebration built around a future she no longer controlled. When I walked back into the house at 11:08 p.m., the party had shifted into that softer phase wealthy gatherings always reach late at night. Jackets draped over chairs, half-empty champagne glasses abandoned beside floral arrangements. Older couples speaking quietly near the fireplace, while jazz music hummed low through hidden speakers in the ceiling. Everything looked warm, comfortable, safe. My mother stood near the staircase laughing at something one of the guests said. But the second she saw me return, her smile tightened almost invisibly. There she is, she announced brightly. I was beginning to think the birthday girl abandoned her own party. A few guests laughed politely. I smiled back. Just needed some air. Her eyes searched my face carefully again. I realized then that she was waiting for signs. Fear, confusion, emotional instability. She wanted me overwhelmed tonight. That was part of the plan. Well, she said lightly while touching my arm. There is still one last thing we should take care of before midnight. There it was again. Midnight. Every conversation eventually circled back to it. Of course, I answered calmly. Her gaze lingered on me another second before she guided me toward her office. As we crossed the foyer, the grandfather clock read 11:14 p.m. I noticed she glanced at it immediately. The office smelled faintly of lavender and paper. The same locked room that had suddenly become the center of everything. My mother closed the door behind us softly before placing a thin stack of papers onto the desk. Nothing dramatic, she said with a reassuring smile. Just temporary protections while you adjust to adulthood. Your grandfather's attorneys recommended it years ago. I looked down at the documents without touching them. Conservatorship Extension Agreement. The words sat boldly across the top page. You want me to sign this tonight? I asked quietly. Only because I care about you, she replied smoothly. Managing large financial assets at your age can be dangerous. People manipulate young women with money, Chloe. They take advantage. I almost admired how naturally the lies came to her now. You think I am incapable of managing my own affairs. Her expression softened instantly into practiced concern. Sweetheart, that is not what this is about. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice gently. You have always struggled under pressure. Ever since your father died. You know that. I stared at her silently. For years, she had rewritten my grief into weakness. Every tear, every anxious moment, every difficult teenage year had quietly become evidence she could use later. I am only trying to protect you, she continued softly. One day you will understand that. Protect. The word almost sounded hollow now. I looked down at the signature line waiting at the bottom of the page. Then I looked at the clock on her bookshelf. 11:21 p.m. Can I think about it first? I asked calmly. Something flashed across her face too quickly to fully hide. Panic. There is really no reason to delay, she said immediately. It is standard procedure. Then it should still be fine tomorrow morning. Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the desk. Certain filings need to process before midnight. There it was. Finally, the truth hidden inside the urgency. I leaned back slowly in the chair. That sounds stressful. My mother froze for half a second. I could almost see her recalculating me in real time. Chloe, she said carefully, do not make this harder than it needs to be. Harder for who? I wanted to ask. But instead I smiled softly and slid the unsigned papers back across the desk toward her. I think I need more time. Silence filled the office. Heavy, controlled, dangerous. Downstairs, distant laughter drifted faintly through the floorboards while the grandfather clock continued ticking steadily somewhere in the foyer. Tick, tick, tick. My mother looked at me differently then. Not like a child, not even like a daughter. Like a problem she had not prepared for. My mother did not speak for several seconds after I refused to sign the papers. She stood beside the desk with one hand resting lightly against the folder while the soft sounds of the party continued downstairs beneath us. Somewhere below, glasses clinked. Someone laughed near the piano. The entire house still believed this was a celebration. Finally, she smiled again. Small. Controlled. You are tired, she said gently. We can discuss it after midnight if that makes you more comfortable. After midnight. The words sounded different now. Not confident anymore. Careful. I stood slowly from the chair. I think that is best. Her eyes stayed fixed on me as I moved toward the office door. Chloe. I paused. You know everything I have done has been for you. I turned back toward her. For years, sentences. Like that would have filled me with guilt immediately. Now they only made me feel tired. Good night, Mom, I said quietly before leaving the room. The hallway outside felt cooler somehow. Cleaner. I walked downstairs into the fading party while checking the grandfather clock automatically. 11:43 p.m. Guests gathered near the dining room, where the birthday cake still sat untouched beneath glowing candles. Several people smiled when they saw me return. Someone handed me another glass of champagne. Across the room, my mother resumed entertaining guests almost instantly, but I noticed she no longer looked relaxed. She checked her phone repeatedly now. She disappeared twice into the hallway near her office. Once, I caught her whispering sharply to the younger man with the gray suit and leather folder. At 11:51 p.m., the pianist stopped playing and several guests began counting down playfully toward midnight. 9 minutes until adulthood. One man joked while raising his glass toward me. I smiled politely. My mother stood near the fireplace, watching me carefully from across the room. No warmth remained in her expression now. Only calculation. Then the front door opened quietly. Harrison Reed stepped inside, wearing the same charcoal overcoat from earlier. My mother stiffened instantly the second she saw him. Even from across the room, I noticed the color drained slightly from her face. Harrison, she said tightly as he approached. I was not aware you were attending tonight. Last-minute decision, he replied calmly. Several nearby guests recognized him immediately and greeted him warmly. My mother forced another smile, but I could see the panic underneath now. Real panic. Mr. Reed stopped beside me and adjusted his cuff calmly before checking his watch. 11:58 p.m. The room buzzed softly with anticipation as guests gathered closer around the cake. Someone dimmed the lights slightly. My mother stepped toward me suddenly and lowered her voice. What did you do? She whispered. I looked at her quietly. I grew up. Her jaw tightened. Chloe, listen to me carefully. You do not understand how complicated this situation actually is. I understand enough. You are making a mistake. I almost laughed at the irony of hearing that from her now. Across the room, guests began the countdown loudly. 10, 9, 8. My mother looked toward Mr. Reed desperately. Harrison, she snapped softly. Whatever paperwork she signed tonight was unauthorized. He met her stare evenly. Actually, Vanessa, the beneficiary, acted entirely within her legal rights. Her face changed completely then. Not dramatic, not explosive, just empty for one terrible second. 3, 2, 1. Cheers erupted through the dining room as midnight arrived. Glasses lifted. People applauded. Someone shouted happy birthday while the grandfather clock began chiming deeply through the foyer. 12 slow strikes echoing through the house my grandfather built. Mr. Reed glanced down briefly at his phone before speaking quietly enough that only my mother and I could hear. The transfer is complete. Silence settled between us despite the celebration surrounding the room. My mother stared at me like she no longer recognized who I was. Maybe she never had, because the frightened girl she spent years managing no longer existed. I set my untouched champagne glass onto a silver tray and looked at her calmly. You spent 18 years preparing to control my life, I said softly. I only needed one night to end it. Then I turned and walked toward the front door while the grandfather clock finished its final chime behind me.